Welcome all. Lovely to see such a great crowd coming in. I will make a disclaimer from day one or from minute one. I'm a .NET nerd in a Java landscape, it seems, so I'm going to show you some. I know anything that will go wrong now, I will just put into the fact that I was trying to introduce .NET in your Java world. All your microservices are wrong, period. It's quite an opinionated view. And before I will explain why I think it is like that, we're going to go to some coding examples. I have some stuff with me. Hopefully we're going to see some nuclear cataclysm and we'll be able to fix this. But first I want to introduce you a little bit to who I am. I'm actually by nature a big geek and I actually like to solve puzzles or challenges. I'm a big Zelda fan, so I'm in my youth again because there was a new version of Zelda just released. And I actually like to transform these problems into a proper architecture. I advanced in the years from the trenches, and I actually, like any band needs, they need a lead vocalist. And at Gaming One, our company where I work, we're an online casino and sports betting provider, also retail-based. I'm actually the director of architecture, so what a big title, but I don't worry too much about that. I have plenty of years of experience in programming. I thought I was younger, but in the meantime, it's 20 years. But it seems my brain is a little bit dead. I did anything from C++ into C#. I ventured a little bit into Java, but unfortunately, I've never been there. I rolled into architecture, and I found my love and beauty to kind of combine the things on the hairy big enterprise architecture with doing things in real life. But that's boring. You're not here to talk about me. You're here for some action. And I think what I'm about to tell you might shock your whole world, because I think all your microservices are wrong. I will just say period. Ready to go with me? You're ready to understand why I think that is the case? I'm sure you're eager by now, or else you will just leave and walk out. We're going to use a technique from mathematics which I don't know how it's called in English. I know how it's called in Dutch. It's called bewezen het ongerijmde. So it means to prove something by going in the wrong path and then saying you're just stuck, right? So it's not bound to make sense. And I like to use a problem case with that because it doesn't make any sense to just talk about theory and all of these things. I like to see some code, and when I do some coding, I like to have like a concrete example we can work with. So I took something home from our industry, and I brought it here as a use case, and we're going to see what could go wrong, potentially. So it's very simplistic. It doesn't contain all of the big rules. Of course, you can imagine it's super complex. We are a super regulated industry, but it kind of carries the root of the problem. So we actually want players to register, and when they are registered, we actually want them to game responsibly. So we're going to ask them to set what we call a deposit limit. So that's going to protect them from over expenditure, I would say. After they have registered and set that limit, we actually want them to deposit some money because we offer real money entertainment at a responsible level. And what that means is during our registration journey, we're going to capture simple things like a username, a password, a first name, a last name, and of course this deposit limit. In reality, we capture a lot more, but again, we kind of limit the use case. And then during deposit, we're not going to ask for a username because you will be logged in, but essentially you'll log in and then there's probably a user ID connected to that, and then we can kind of record transactions for you. And we're going to check that limit while we are doing that. So as we are doing this mathematical technique, let's go and try to enter the microservice. And I can guarantee you that when we do kind of recruitment interviews, a lot of people choose this path. So this is something that I picked up in the trenches, and of course, I've been guilty of working like that too. When you present that problem to most people, they're going to come up with two components, services, microservice, whatever you want to call it, right? The thing has to have a name. And they'll probably come up with something like a customer microservice because we're going to group all of that data there. And they're probably going to come up with something that is going to be payment or deposit or credit, something related to that area. You with me on this? How does that look on a solution design? I'm still an architect, so I like to first kind of sketch something before we kind of go into coding. So basically, we have two microservices. the customer and the, I think I call it here the deposit. And I kind of made two colors just to distinguish the ownership, because we have two teams here that are going to work on both contexts. Of course, as the big books and the big blog posts tell us to be, we should put a database to each microservice, and we're going to put some very simplistic data schema inside here, right? We have a username, we have the first name, the last name, we have probably a password, and we have the deposit limit kind of stored on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we'll store anything that is related to the transactions of deposit. So basically, who is this? Which payment method did we use, because we offer multiple payment methods, and how much do we kind of deposit? Then I don't know how much you're into the technique of micro frontends, but we kind of philosophize that if we want to really have that vertical boundary, you also want to push that into the UI. And we kind of have a digital channel which we serve in front of our customers, and we kind of put those two micro frontends inside there. So one to do the registration, so that's going to be exclusively customer in this context, and one that is deposit, that is going to be exclusively the deposit. I tried to put some technical contract there. You can choose whatever you want. You can do REST, gRPC, whatever is out there these days that is brilliant to use. We'll leave that to the tech guys to come up with what they really think. And that kind of is our design. Although we forgot one thing. We forgot to kind of invoke from the deposit world the customer service, because we need to get an access to this deposit limit. And so basically we need to expose just another endpoint by customer. So we call the customer guys and they say, hey guys, what's up? And we tell them, look, can you expose this endpoint so we can get to your data, so we can check our deposit limit, right? Makes sense. Enough theory, as you are all, or most likely coders, or very close to code. Let's go down into the trenches, where stuff really gets done. And let's take a look. I prepared some code. I'm sorry, it's .NET. It's a means to an end. It's not the best brilliant code you're ever going to see, so don't hold it against me, but I'll walk you through. So we coded a small React digital channel, right, where we're going to put those two microservices inside. Unfortunately, our tech lead that is busy with all of these things is not here, but he can probably explain you how he did all of that. It's something to do with some form of injection that is very popular these days. So let's take a look at the other side, which is the API and databases. I kind of created two small projects that just kind of load in Docker two databases, the two databases we presented with the schema that we presented, so the simplistic variant. And then we're going to take a look at some code. We're going to run this, and of course, the world is going to be green and everything is going to be sunny. So, with no further ado, let's just run this thing. So basically, I created a small thingy. I don't even know which kind of technology I used, but it doesn't make any sense because you're all Java coders, I understood. So basically, it's a username, it's a password, it's a first name, last name, and it's this deposit limit. Okay? So I'm going to ask, and hopefully the demigods are not here, so they're not going to destroy my presentation. So they didn't. Thank you for that. So that's the first kind of database. So the customer team is up and running with their database. Hooray. And then we go into the deposit world. And so the other team is going to kind of pull up the same kind of thing. Basically, I'm just using the same thing. I was so good, I copied the code. So don't use that in reality. We have a transaction ID we put in there. We have the username for whom this is. Should be a user ID, but again, simplicity. Payment method, just a varchar. And then an amount. Nice and simple. Let's create a database. Give some time for Docker to come up. There it is. And that is kind of the small setup. So we have two persistence aspects, and we can get going. So I don't know if you are familiar with the .NET ecosystem, but basically what I did, I kind of created an opinionated idea about, okay, I'll have something for my protocol. I'm using something called Web API, which is just a REST-like interface. So it's going to give me all of the machinery and bottle boilerplate code to kind of get that going. I have something around my contract, so I can kind of use DTOs and kind of pull them in, or I can serialize back to them and kind of push them down on the API. I have something that is going to be the persistence layer, so I can kind of store into my database, write into my database. I used a small micro ARM in this context called Dapper, probably not really familiar with you. And then I have the application world. I kind of layer this towards the onion principles, where you have like the application layer around the domain layer. But I think you all agree at this stage that mega aggregates and what have we, we've seen a very interesting talk just this morning. We don't need them, right? So I'm gonna cut a little bit to the chase. We have a command service here. It doesn't do a lot of things. It just kind of gets a repository injected, and it doesn't do much more than just invoke this repository and kind of execute that code. So there's not a lot of error handling, because I really wanted to take away all of that unnecessary stuff and really showcase you where potential problems might come up. So in the persistence world, we actually have this repository that we just implemented. Very straightforward, of course, hard-coded connection strings. No, I didn't do that, that's really great, but there's some stuff in here which you probably shouldn't be doing, so you can decapitate me by now. Perfect, so basically what we do, we get this DTO, we get it from the React frontend, push down from the micro frontend, push down into this API, it passes it down to the repository, and then it kind of just executes some SQL and is going to insert that username. I did add a check, a very ugly one for multiple usernames, but in theory, there should be a lot more here, and you should have a lot more coding, unit testing, and what have we these days. So nice and simple, very straightforward, and the deposit API is not too much different, right? So when we go and take a look there, you'll see a similar setup. So we have like this little command service. I used a little bit of CQS here, and it's going to take this deposit DTO, is going to just transform that into a call to the repository, which you kind of see here, and then that will get persisted there too. Of course, we have to call our customer friends, because they have the deposit limit stored for us, which they capture during the registration process. So basically, again, some hard-coded chisel, but no one should care about this. We basically set up a protocol with them, we set up this contract, and we kind of invoke their API that is going to allow us to get back this deposit limit, and then we can run our business logic, which basically just means that, are we going to blow the current deposit with adding this new deposit? In reality, we have much more safer and boilerplate code around this, but again, I'm just trying to showcase here what we want to do. Nice and simple, so you can imagine that in the customer world, we kind of have this small handler that is just going to allow us to query the repository, and that is just going to kind of pull up the deposit limit for a specific user. Brilliant? Great. Let's take a look how that works in reality. So I'm just gonna fire up these two components, and I have this little React frontend already running here. Let's just take a look if it's still running. It is still running, so that's good. So basically, there's a few bugs inside, so don't pay attention to them. Every good software should have some bugs, I think. So basically, we have a registration form, nice and simple. It's just a representation of what we just coded. You have the database, we have the API. We can capture username, password, first name, last name, and of course the deposit limit. And then we'll have this deposit form, but for that I just need to log in. Now, there's not a lot of super authentication code in here. We just did some hard-coded login so we can kind of store the username somewhere, I think in a Redux store. So I'm going to create a username. I'll use the password, hopefully secret. Voila. My name is still Dwight, last time I checked. And I'm gonna set a 200 euro deposit limit. Hopefully nothing goes wrong. Great. So we have our user. The customer team did brilliantly. They are flying, they're on fire. They make sure that the customers are coming in, they're having a smooth registration flow. I mean, how long took it? A few seconds and we're in. So everybody's happy. We go, we log in, because I'm here to game, and I really want to first put on some, sorry, last, you're getting in my way. So I'm going to go to this deposit page, right? And so it's me, great. Nobody's depositing under my amount. And I'm going to put in like a 190, and I'm going to use one of these payment methods. So hopefully nothing goes wrong again. So really great, perfect. Here's the small bug. I first have to go to registration and deposit, nothing wrong. I'll put an additional 10 just to showcase you that our logic is being executed, so great. And now if we try to deposit again, the mechanism to protect us should kick in. And hopefully it does. Well, there we are. So basically, the error handling is not too proper. It should say, oh, you've blown your limit, try to deposit lower, or you're done for the day, go and try to do something else, so you don't get into any trouble. Great. However, the customer people, they're party people, and they like to go out. I don't know, our company is based in Liège, and there's a concept they call Thursday and Friday, and they call it jeudi. So basically on jeudi, they just go out and they drink just a bit too much. And then some cataclysm potentially happens. Because the friends from the customer world, their stuff is shutting down. Okay, you could have things that pull it back up, and you can talk about high availability, but there's still this moment of time where it will go down. So another, maybe my wife, Josephine, comes along, and she also registers, and she says, okay, let's register, so let's go. Well, and she sets it to 200. So that's not going to work, right? And then I come along again, and I try to deposit. I think I'm past my deposit limit, there's nothing wrong anymore. There we go again, sorry. So when I put this additional 20, I should have put a lower amount of transactions that I put in so I could showcase you. We're basically going to have another type of error, which is not exposed here, because something went very wrong. We actually destroyed one of our core business processes at this moment in time by using our microservice design that we put down. So, back to the presentation. Let's analyze a little bit, if it comes back up, what happened, because something really went wrong right now. We had a very smooth, we went to production, everybody was happy, we were having fun, some team was drinking, their stuff goes down, and now we have this cataclysm. Customer service is hot, and of course, our CEO Interactive, I got this picture, it's an inside joke, but he really looks like this, and I got it from someone that went to church, and he kind of gave it to me, so I was bound to use it somewhere. But basically, Thor yielded his hammer, this guy gets mad, gets on the phone and says, why the fuck are we not able to deposit? Sorry, was I allowed to say that? Sorry, bleep that out. Why are we not able to deposit? What's going on? You told me, Mr. Architecture Director, your architecture would allow me to have teams in autonomy, and they would not have these kind of problems that we are just facing. So we sit together and we say, what happened? Well, it seems that the bleep it out too from the customer world were indeed partying too late, and their service went down. So basically, we were not able to get the limit for the player anymore. Makes sense, right? So the reason for that disaster is because we actually have a dependency towards that microservice, towards their world. Because they are the owner of that data. Makes sense, right? They own it, they persist it, so we have to go and get it from them to make that happen. And somebody tell me why we do that. Who decided that the data belongs to the customer? And I kind of picked that up into the aggregates are dead, or I don't know what the title of the previous talk was, but I kind of picked it up there too. why do we as an industry go into the concept of saying, "Ah, of course, this is customer and all of that data goes there, and this is deposit and all of that data goes there." Some of the reasons I picked up across the years, once some of them I've been guilty too, were data is grouped and centralized around the same entity. When it's customer and it's properties of customers, put it down there. When it's something around deposits, put it down there. When it's something around gameplay, put it down there. And we kind of craft out these what we call microservices based on that concept. We sell experiences. So one of the arguments you can also hear, and I think this is for a lot of industries true, you want to have a good experience. And what the kind of gurus of organizations did, they said, you know what, if we make sure that people don't need others to work, when we focus them on these journeys, on these simple journeys, they are autonomous and they can work. And project managers love that. When there are no dependencies, they are really happy. So they kind of buy into that belief and say, you know what, we have a registration journey, we have a deposit journey, let's slice it up to that one. So we're not taking the entity approach, but we're really using this journey approach and we're kind of separating on that boundary. And now we kind of make the small exception. So you're the owner of customer data and you're the owner of deposit data. So when I need you, well, it's just a call away, right? We will just call you and you give me the data. We make a small, nice contract and everybody still does its own thing. I don't know if they're actually that good reasons, because why does this data need to be centralized? I thought we were in 23 and the 80s are kind of long time ago when we had the first relational database and what was it type of databases in assembler that popped in where you had the central database team, and if you were lucky, you could call them and ask them to do something, but most of the time the answer was no, we will not do that. So why are we still doing that? That centralized idea of data. Even though we kind of chop it up in small databases, we're still somehow centralizing. What do all these fields have in common? So from the journey perspective, you can say, great, in a simple journey, you might be able to take up a team. But what happens if we start adding the favorite payment method inside the registration funnel? Because we see that it converts better. What happens then? Do we kind of say, now we lift the payment method, favorite payment method capturing into the context of the customer? What do we do if we start setting the favorite casino games of customers? We kind of lift that over into the customer because it's a great journey? Sure, we should really deliver great journeys. That doesn't mean it's a good model to bring into the microservice world. I don't think so. Because you're going to have to move all of that data around, right? And for those journeys that need data, well, why do we actually want to rely on external dependencies? I once talked to Udi Dahan, I don't know if you know him or if you ever talked to him, but he has this nice slide, and it kind of shows in real life, physical human, understandable time scale, what certain type of computer events mean. So he kind of used a reference scale of one computer clock cycle, like one tick is whatever nanoseconds. But when I talk to you and I say, oh, we did it in 5 microseconds, you're going to say, whoa, it's fast, I cannot even think about it. When you scale that up and you start talking about network dependencies, you're talking about 100s to millennia in real human understandable time scale frame. So why are we introducing that dependency? We're just waiting for disaster to happen, I think. How autonomous is this microservice? Sure, it was quite autonomous to build. It was quite autonomous to package. We have the dependency towards a contract. But at runtime, is it truly autonomous? Does it really run on its own? I mean, I like to do my work on my own, and I don't like to call people or harass people to do my work. I think the same should be true for microservices. How can we spot this? This technique is called the entity requirements, and it popped up this morning in this talk, and I was really inspired. I even tweeted about it. And I actually want to say, look at process and data together. Why do we separate process and data? Where do we need the deposit limit? Do we need it in the context of registration, or do we need it in the context of trying to deposit? Which guru stood up and said, no, we have to put it in the customer for good reasons? No, it's damn wrong. It should not be there. You don't need it to do the registration. The UX people might say that it's brilliant to do, and I agree with them, but there are other techniques. So you have to look at this transactional boundary. Aggregates were coined in that context. In theory, your aggregates should be a consistent boundary, and that's it. This is the same thing. Make sure that your process and data are consistent. Sure, eventual consistency exists. Sure, it's a good element when it's necessary and when the business process is naturally async. When it's not, why do you try to separate that? You will get into trouble. There's no technical implementation that will be able to solve that. You will always have the element of time against you. So look at that boundary of the process and the data and try to discover what is the consistent state. How can I go from consistency to consistency in this context? Not in the whole system context, that's too broad. And ask yourself, this is the easiest technique, by the way. What does the deposit limit have to do with my personal information? Is it because I'm Dwight that I suddenly have a deposit limit of $250 or euro? Is it because my last name starts with an M that is my deposit limit? What do they truly have to do with each other? There's no single thing that binds them together except the fact that there's something what I call a polyseme, which means there is something which you could call a customer, and it's identified by a customer ID, and that's it. And every context can now store its data related to the process it's doing for that concept, this polyseme. And you kind of start separating the unneeded dependencies from each other. So you have to state the connection between the data and the process, use the entity requirements or whatever you want, and just color them and put them in buckets of colors and whatever you want, and then start naming them. So my teachers were wrong, because when they taught me all of this stuff, they taught me ERDs and relational database, blah, 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 blah. And we started using that as a pattern to build microservices, because it was the next thing in the industry. And basically, we thought we all knew it, right? And so we just moved along, and we started including this spaghetti RPC, which just eats us. Great, enough blah, 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 blah. How does that look? So basically, back to the solution design. We know that the red is not good. We want it to become green. And so basically, down below, if we take away the red stuff, we should move the deposit limit from the left-hand side into the right-hand side. And so basically what happens, our problem at runtime disappears, because now the deposit guys and girls are completely on their own. They don't need anybody now to operate. If they were partying on jeudi and their stuff goes down, it's their problem. They're going to have to fix it. Customer, not involved at this stage. They don't know, and honestly, they don't care, because they're busy with, registration and account management and what have we. They're not busy with the context of depositing. Brilliant people will spot and say, but hey, what about your UX requirement? What about the fact that you still need to capture that deposit limit during registration? What if we invert the question and we start talking with the people from UX in a different way? Your 100% consistent user experience is going to look at, we capture the deposit limit during registration. But what if this thing is down? Do you want to stop converting? Do you want to stop taking registrations? Because people who are not registered are anonymous and we don't know them. So we cannot get back to them. Our industry is very competitive. You have only one shot. They come in, you don't convert, they leave, they never come back. So why are you trying to settle for always the extreme? Is it always so binary on-off? What if there are shades of gray? So what if we put up another microservice, micro frontend, sorry, that is owned by the blue girls and boys, that is going to be part of the registration journey. So to the customer itself, they either get the full experience doing the registration and setting their limit, or maybe they were drunk and we only get the registration experience, minus the deposit limit. Here comes the brilliant thing. The guys from from deposit are truly autonomous because they know you didn't set your limit now. They know you registered, but they know you didn't set your limit. How do they know you registered? Well, you're logged into the system. So basically, they say, great, you can continue. So now they're in absolute control, and we start discussing with the UX and say, if we didn't capture it, would it be okay if we, as a first step, ask to set the limit, so we are fully compliant, and then we move on to the deposit? Next time, they don't have to do it anymore, right? And by the way, from the account management perspective, we can also inject this micro front end, and now you don't even have to write an account management thing anymore, because now you can change your limit from the same micro front end, owned by us. We know the business rules. We know the context. We talk with our business people every day. So, back into code. Enter the dragon. Sorry, that was too fast. We'll hold off the little autonomy girls for a minute. So, I'm going to close this solution. Terminate. I think that would be the best one. I started live coding once during one of these sessions. With the time left and the expenditure, completely impossible. So forgive me for not live coding. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's take a look at the database involved. Because basically, we still have the same databases, but the schemas are a little bit different. So into the customer world, we only capture what is relevant for us. We did the exercise of the anti-requirements. We did the exercise of working this through with the business. And we come to the fact that we only need, for the registration, username, a password, a first name, and a last name. That is our process boundary. That is our consistent state, what we want to capture. So basically, again, via the same technique, we can kind of create a small instance. So I hope I use the same convention. Yes, so basically this is just using some kind of DB migration tool, and it's pulling up this, this database. So it's there. Great. Perfect. Next up is the deposit guys and girls. So we're going to take a look at how their database evolved. I think you can probably predict how it evolved. It's not that we're looking at a 20 million years old schema. So basically, we have the table a little bit altered because we're not only capturing a transaction ID or a deposit transaction ID or whatever you want to call it, with a username and a payment method and an amount. What we're also capturing in a second table, because now it's our own data, because we need it for our process to work, we're capturing for a specific username now the deposit limit. Great. So we can create that database too, and then we can take a look at the code and the various usage scenarios, the experience that our players will have in various scenarios. So let's run that, right? So basically first destroy the previous instance because the schema would not be compatible with the API. There we go. So that's up. So small alterations that were made to the application, to the customer command service, basically not a lot. We just push in the DTO again. We just ask it, simplistic variation. We just ask it to register this thing. The only difference now is that in our DTO, and I didn't show you in the previous one, but I think you trust me, that it contained the deposit limit. So the only thing we have here is a representation of what we need for our business process to execute properly. Nice and simple. So the rest of this API is the same. However, one brilliant thing, as we removed the deposit limit, we also removed that endpoint that was actually only there to serve the others, not of our main concern, right? So we got rid of that too, and we end up with a much more lenient state of what we really want to do. And now we can fiddle and tweak and work with the business to kind of optimize the registration process. Great. When we start looking now at the deposit API, and we take a look over there, what happened is that, of course, the deposit command service was changed. because that's where the dependency was towards the others. What did we do? We replaced the runtime RPC dependency, we replaced it with a database that we control dependency because it's in the same database. If it goes down, it's our problem. In a DevOps or post-DevOps world, that is a good practice to have. You build it, you run it, you maintain it, you ship it, whatever variant you wanna have there. So the only thing I do here is I'm gonna now read my own data that I potentially captured, and I can even make decisions like, okay, I didn't set it yet, so bahoo, something goes wrong. Maybe that redirect the user towards other flows because they were trying to fiddle around and found like a little detour in your system, which we don't want to allow to them. And I don't know if you know, but I didn't zoom in onto it too much, but we also fixed a serious issue, most likely into consistency. Because if you have two databases that are not controlled by yourself, and even if they were controlled by yourself, when do you run the last if statement on when you didn't blow the limit? What happens if I figure out, dear sweetie, can you log in my same account, and we're going to click exactly at the same moment the deposit? Are we sure that we can run concurrently? Are we not going to go into exceptions there? By bringing this into our own process, into our own control, we can even enforce it at database level, at API level, wherever we want to have it. Again, we end up in a much beautiful world. So basically, the only thing that was changed here too is we now added a small query service that just allows us to query that deposit limit so that we can ask the deposit limit from the user interface and say, was a limit already set? Yes? Okay. Just go to the deposit flow. Ah, no, it was not set. First present the limit setting flow. Okay. So how does that look? Something is still running here. Get the bleep out of here. So how does that look when we now present ourselves as the player that wants to play deposit register, and some of this stuff goes happy shiny pad versus not so happy shiny pad. So let's take away the swagger stuff. I'm just gonna reload a little bit this thing, just not to have any poison from the previous session. So again, Dwight comes along and he says, I'm gonna register my secret password, then my first name, then my last name. Funny, the deposit limit is at exactly the same point. Nothing changed for our player. They don't see any difference at this moment in time. So I'm like, okay, I need to set my limit. I'm gonna set it. I go for the 200. Great. Register, whew, everything still works. No, I don't wanna add to LastPass. And next thing I wanna do is I wanna deposit. Same, by the way, this is the demo effect, forgive me very much. I should switch to the modern user interface. So we'll redo that again. But you know, this is the registration fund. It has two versions inside, the previous bad version and the new version, so forgive me. Registration just looks the same, works the same, would work completely the same. I'm gonna be logging in now, so I kind of go into this. Oh, that's good. And I'm gonna go into the deposit world. And so basically, as I used the wrong version of this thing, so I kind of show you a bit of a degraded experience, it's first going to ask me to set the limit. So I used the wrong user interface against the wrong service, so it was not sending the deposit limit, although I set it. So you're seeing a bit of the less degraded experience. So I'm like, okay, before I want to deposit, this was not asked during my registration journey. I'm gonna confirm this limit, and now I can spend any amount of money I want, as long as I adhere to the limit. Great. I want to redeposit. So, but again, customer people were happy and drunk, so we kind of stop their API. I hope it's not going to be a surprise that actually this does not have any effect at all. So, I put another 20, I use a payment method, and everything works fine. When you end up in this scenario, when the customer team is dying, but the deposit team is not dying, COOs tend to get happy. They tend to be, you know, I have two main business processes that drive my company. I'm only impacted at whatever, let's make it mathematically 50%. But the customer guys better get to it to kind of pull back up their stuff. But they're in a fully autonomous world. Registration doesn't work, they know where to be. So, if my wife now wants to register, and here we go. So the other effect would be, sorry. So, customer guys come in, they bootstrap it again, everything works, brilliant. But now the deposit girls have been drinking too much too. So basically their stuff is down too. Now we go to registration, and what happens is the user interface is adjusting itself. Why? Because the micro front end, owned by the deposit team, is not being loaded because it's smart enough to say, well, an API is not there. I'm going for the degraded experience, although you will not notice too much about it. So now Josephine registers. I hope she doesn't mind that I'm using her name. Voila. She registers. And then, of course, if I would log out, and I kind of log in with her credentials, that would work because it's normally owned by what we would say the customer. Great, and if I now want to deposit, this is a little bug inside. It should actually say you're not able to deposit because there's something wrong, but okay. I didn't put up the full error handling around that stuff. So basically here you see that as soon as you pull up the deposit world again, yep, there it is. This would be a correct scenario because now I would be there. But if I go back to registration, you're going to see the deposit limit setting is there again. So this takes a little bit of a habit to start working with your UX people so they understand that, okay, the stop and go, the pickup of the journeys, because of the availability, because IT components, unfortunately, are not 100% available and never will they be. And it's the same as in real life. When you call a company and they're eating, you might not get a phone call, and they might have to think about other processes of capturing the phone call. It's exactly the same here. We just have to be smart and try to come up with better journeys that reflect a more proper autonomous world down below. Last part. So what do you want to achieve by introducing microservices? I think the golden grail that microservices were promised to bring, at least that's how I got it, was to truly bring us autonomy. This little girl likes it. She has full autonomy. She's in her chariot, she has her horse, she can drive around. She doesn't need mommy or daddy to come and push her, so she's happy. And I think that each microservice, or the real microservices, or call them whatever you want as of now, should bound themselves to what we call business capabilities. I went into the ivory tower of the enterprise architecture. I took the big books and I blew the dust off. And I started reading and I saw something called business capabilities. I started researching back into the ideas of SOA. I know it's a sexual disease in our Dutch language, but the service-oriented architecture from the days had tenants. If you start reading that material, our industry destroyed it because they brought XML, and everything was about SOAP and XML, but actually they were talking about your business capabilities. If you put correct process boundaries and consistent state, you're going to end up with a proper service-oriented architecture. So basically your process and data should be together in consistent transactions, not the other way around. Don't try to split your process over multiple boundaries if it doesn't make any sense. So don't think in entities, but provide business autonomy per capability. And this is what they like. When they come to me and they say, "Dear Mr. Architecture Director, how do you prove that your architecture is working? What's your measure for success?" First time I was like, because everybody's happy. That's not a good answer in front of a board of directors. So I said, imagine we can only scale one initiative per year with our full capacity we have. What if I'm here to tell you that by doing this technique, we'll be able to run 20 to 30 initiatives per quarter? What would that mean for you? That you have more business agility, which will offer you speed and time to market. And if you don't, then I think the dark side will await. So I suggest, if you want to go down the proper path and you want to destroy that monolith, and there's a lot of push to go back to monoliths, I think probably because the microservice failed to deliver what they promised, what the industry has tried to sell. I think if you try to do that via really business capabilities, bounded context, the true bounded context, and you start going down that path, you will make those monoliths smaller too. You will make that IT mess. Project managers love that. When I tell them, they first don't understand, they're like, "Are you from Mars or something?" But when they truly understand, they understand, we don't have to manage the dependencies. We can make our project smaller. We can make the monolith smaller. We can make the impact surface smaller when we do changes. And if you reduce it further and further until it dies and until we end up all singing happy in the city of Oz, I think, in the Emerald City, that we reached the end and that we reached proper microservices. I have 4 minutes left, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. Or if you want to understand more of my crazy ideas, you can come and visit us at the Gaming One booth, where I will be happily expecting you to explain how we put this in practice, because we are running this in practice. This is not existing in PowerPoint. We are running parts of this in practice. We still have a long way to go. There are some people here that engineer in our community, so they know we still have a long route to go. But if you really are inspired and want to understand, how did you do that, or I don't understand how that works, feel free to ask a question or come and speak with me. Thank you.